A nice way to boost your grade for the essay is to ensure you use MLA style as perfectly as you can. Here's the marking scheme that you have uploaded for yourself on Leia that you can use as kind of a checklist for the whole essay and see exactly where your marks will come from. So 15 marks for your introduction, 30 for the body paragraphs, 10 for the conclusion, 25 for your grammar, sentence structure, use of proper language, 10 marks for evidence and documentation, so for the quotations that you use and have chosen and the way that you discuss them, and then 10 marks for your MLA format, and that's what this video is going to show you how to do properly. What you'll also need to do is read this essay that's been uploaded for you to Leia, which is an essay that goes through all the ins and outs of setting up your essay to properly be in MLA format. I won't go through every single step of these rules here because you should have covered these in your 101 class, but you can look just visually at what your first page should look like. You need to have your last name in the top right-hand corner of the page next to the page number. You need to have on the first page of your essay your first name, last name, your teacher's name, your course name, and your date. Everything needs to be double spaced. Everything needs to look exactly as it's laid out in this example. And reading the essay will give you all the instructions on how to make that happen. But let's actually start at the end of the essay because the biggest chunk of those 10 marks for MLA come from a well-built works cited page and properly cited quotations. So in the sample essay, I've given you a works cited entry for every single text that we read this semester, as well as for all the possible secondary sources for your essay. So your job is just going to be to find the ones that you use in your essay. For example, if you're writing your essay on the hockey sweater, you need to make sure you have this full entry in your own works cited page. And if you use the Sandra Chang Cradle What Does Quebec Want article as your secondary source for that essay, then you also need to include this entry in your works cited. So I'm happy to have done this work for you of building the works citeds themselves because I'm the one that found these articles for you and provided you with these texts. What I'm going to be picky about though, because of that, and just because it's what I want to be perfect in your essay, is that you do get the format correctly. So let's look at an example. If you wrote your essay on fast break, you need to copy and paste this entire entry into your own works cited page that you will build at the end of your essay. Your works cited page needs to be called works cited in the title. Up in the header, you need to have your last name. Again, I'm fantasizing that LeBron James took this class. The last page of the essay is probably page 5, whatever. You can automatically do the page numbering on Word. And just be careful when you copy and paste because you want to make sure you do it where you keep the source formatting, because that gives you the proper hanging indent where the first line of the entry is over here on the left, the second line of the entry is indented. If you're not careful, you could end up with this, which is incorrect because you don't have the double spacing and you don't have the hanging indent. You can easily fix that just by going into your paragraph, changing the spacing back to double, and changing the indentation back to hanging, which is what every single works cited entry you build has to have. Then make sure in your works cited you also have the secondary source that you used. If you use the one provided for you for this essay, for Edward Hirsch, if you were writing on fast break, you would go to the Kaiser Body entry, some competing analogies for sport, where you took a quote from. But you should know the rule is anything you quote in your essay, anything you used as a source in your essay needs to show up in your works cited page. And then you do the same thing, adding in this other entry, keeping the source formatting so you get the double space and the hanging indent. And your works cited should look like this, though there's one change that needs to happen, one last change, which again I'll be picky on. It has to be in alphabetical order. So the Hirsch needs to come after the body. So whatever your two sources are, or if you went rogue and did some extra research and have a third source or a fourth source, you have to put them all here in your works cited properly done. If you're not sure how to cite a new source that wasn't provided for you, that you found on your own, just reach out to me and I can let you know. Going backwards then, the rule for MLA is that the first word of a works cited entry, which is almost always the last name of the author of that entry, the author of that source, that is what needs to show up in the brackets where you use a quotation from that source in your essay. So here is the Patricia Smith entry for the poem What Leaps from a Storm's Throat. That would be in your works cited page if you have quotes from that poem in your essay. When you quote that poem in your essay itself, there's immediately a bracket after the quotation, and inside that bracket you have the author's last name, Smith. So that's how it matches. You're leaving breadcrumbs for your reader. When we read a quotation in your essay and we see that there's a bracket with the word Smith in there, that's a signal, that's a sign for us to go check your works cited page if we want to go find that quote, if we want more information about that source, because it matches with this works cited entry. If you're writing your essay on a poem, which is Casey at the Bat, Patricia Smith's What Leaps from a Storm's Throat, or Fast Break by Edward Hirsch, the next part of your entry within the brackets is going to be the line numbers of that poem. This is the first 2 lines of the poem, so it's line 1 hyphen line 2. If you're writing your essay on a short story like Raymond's Run or The Hockey Sweater, then your bracket will be the author's last name and the page number where that quote takes place. Again, this matches the works cited entry. The Bambara links it to this entry, and that this has this page range. It's on pages 23 to 29, as you see in your document of the story itself, and this quote, we can find it on page 24. Errors that I often see in incorporating quotations into a text is the punctuation. You always want the period to come after the bracket to close off that entry and that quotation and then separate it from the analysis of that quote, which is going to come next. And pay attention to how you introduce the quotations as well. You have a variety of different ways of doing it. You can say something like she says, or the character says, or the character expresses, and then use a comma before the quote. That's fine. You can also use a full sentence leading into the quotation followed by a colon. But that's the punctuation mark that would be indicating that a quotation is now coming. Or you can just incorporate the quote into your own sentence by making it flow naturally and nicely. Just remember that using a quotation is not an excuse for breaking grammatical rules. If you use fragments or you have grammatical errors because a quotation is there and it messes up the flow of your writing, that's still confusing and difficult to read. You have to put the effort in to properly transition from your own words to the author's own words. And again, reading this sample essay will give you a lot of different examples of how to do that. This essay also explains the rules for block quotes. If your quotation is long, meaning 4 lines of writing from a short story or 4 lines of poetry, you have to build the block form style of a quotation, which is indicated for you here. You have an example of one from a story and one from a poem. And again, for those of you writing your essay on poems, if you are quoting less than 4 lines, 2 or 3 lines, don't forget to use that front slash in order to indicate where one line of the poem ends and where the other line of the poem begins. If you're quoting from your secondary source and there are no page numbers, or if you're quoting from Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson, which does not have any page numbers and also doesn't have any line numbers because it's not technically poetry, you just have to put the author's last name by itself in the bracket. Still needs to match with the works cited entry that you've built, but that author's last name after the quotation in the bracket just tells me to go look in this article and I can find for myself where that quotation is, because the article does not give any page numbers or the article does not give any line numbers because it's not a poem. Those are the major things that I'm picky about that I'm going to expect you to be able to get perfect if you want to get that 10 out of 10 for the MLA mark, which again can be a big, nice, easy boost for your essay, turning a 60 into a 70 into an 80, and so on. There are always potentially little things that aren't covered in this essay or weren't covered by this video, or that you are not sure how to apply in your specific circumstances. If you do not know how to quote something, if you do not know how to put a reference for a specific quotation that you have, if you don't know how to use the works cited page, if you're not sure how to format something in terms of your paragraphs, please look it up. Do not guess. The rules here are very precise and very specific, but they're also very easily available to you. Whether it's looking something up in your handbook, whether it's asking someone in your class, whether it's asking me or looking up an MLA site online, there's really no excuse for getting any of these steps incorrect.